that change the course of the conversation and any number of important issues facing our country today. Laura Bellin will be with us in the next half hour. Laura is a top reporter, flaming liberal, of course. She makes no apologies. And I don't think you should have to make an apology for how you believe. We have moved past the time, thank God, we have evolved past the time when anybody is comfortable making racist remarks, religious bigotry remarks, or any of those things. I'm not saying racism is over and all these evils are over. As long as we practice different faiths or no faiths at all, or as long as we continue to look differently, which has seemed completely bizarre to me, but as long as people are of different color and different culture in this big country, we're going to have morons who insist on being racist and acting like racist. They don't do it around me. I have picked up a new book by John McWhorter. And I believe in John McWhorter is an African-American intellectual and author. And he has written a book called Woke Racism. In other words, Mr. McWhorter believes that wokeness is primarily a function of bratty white kids who really aren't very skilled or educated, but will stand around screaming about everything on Twitter like they are the most moral people on earth, although some of them do look like they have a meth problem. And they spent what little money they get working overnights at a convenience store on tattoos. But somehow, these people became the woke America, the woke army. And McWhorter in Woke Racism debunks a lot of that nonsense. And he should. He should. Really, if you look at some of these riots, and I'll call them riots, they're not mostly peaceful protesters. They're violent and hateful. What happened in Portland was not a peaceful protest, and most of the rioters, not protesters, were not peaceful. I would refer to the disgrace that's happened at Des Moines City Council meetings where people commanded the mic meant for citizen comment and went on for an hour in some cases, F-bombing everybody in the place, screaming and hollering. And then another woke individual would approach the microphone and do the same thing. There's a couple of councilmen down there. I don't know what's happening in Des Moines or the suburbs of Des Moines, but downtown Des Moines has some really screwed up city council people, including Josh Mandelbaum, whose family is very successful in real estate. I don't know what Mandelbaum's problem is, but he's almost guaranteed re-election, and he is the most woke, defund the police type of guy. Well, I shouldn't say he's defund the police. I don't know that for sure. But there's a big conversation going on in the Des Moines city limits, not the suburbs, which are white and comfortable, of course, and not really in East Des Moines, which is kind of the working class section of Des Moines. I'm very comfortable over there around the fairgrounds. Some of those bars around the fairgrounds, oh, yeah, I love them. But anyway, there's a real conversation going on in Des Moines as to whether Des Moines should be woke. Whether Des Moines should be woke. Well, I don't live in Des Moines. It's not my business what they do in Des Moines. But I hope some Iowa common sense gets a grip on a few of these people. You simply cannot act on the people's business if the entire meeting is taken over by a bunch of rage-fueled nutcases who are screaming that everybody's a racist but them. Everybody's a racist and immoral to a degree if you're not in the woke crowd. I want you to think about that a minute. If you're not in the woke crowd, if you're not in my little gang, then you're probably damaged and morally inferior. Ignorant and morally inferior. Are you ignorant and morally inferior? Because I'm not going to buy that. Are you folks out there in Fort Dodge Land, Webster County, and the surrounding area, are you a bunch of morons who hate black people or people of color, as the phrase is now, the new phrase, people of color? Do you hate people for that reason? Because I don't, and I never did. And if you say something racist in my presence, I will correct you in any way that's, allowed or not allowed. Some of my friends have been talking about this Alec Baldwin situation. And some of my friends who are not woke, but they're older leftist types. Some of my friends who are older leftist types are still barking about Trump. Still, they just can't let go of it, again, because they're afraid of Trump. They are scared to death of Donald Trump, that he will reclaim the presidency in 2024, especially after this disastrous Joe Biden presidency. It should be pretty easy to do. The Democrats got what they asked for, and they got what they deserved. They wouldn't put up somebody who might actually do something. They wouldn't put up with somebody who might actually address income inequality. They wouldn't put up anybody with any charisma at all. They had to find somebody who could be controlled and still look electable. Somebody that people have known for a long time as a gregarious blowhard, mainly, who in 1988 gave a speech that was word for word from a British politician's speech. Yeah, Joe Biden is kind of damaged goods. He's not Uncle Joe, never was. And now he's really not our doddering uncle, is he? He's really not that stumbling Joe Biden who's always trying to get attention, the gregarious Joe Biden, who always seemed to be trying to elbow Barack Obama out of the way. Barack Obama was one of the most charismatic presidents we've had in the last 100 years. Along with, yes, Ronald Reagan, and even Bill Clinton in his first couple of years in office. Certainly by the time Monica Lewinsky came around in that scandal, he has not been looked at favorably. And he looks terrible in his later years. He did not age well at all. He looks awful. But at one time, really his first 4 years in office, especially if you were a Democrat, especially if you were on the cultural left, people loved Bill Clinton. We all forgot about this. And I'm glad for this series, American Impeachment, because it has brought into sharp focus what kind of person Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton really were. I still take a lot of guff from my friends. Oh, you should let go of Hillary Clinton. Well, I tell them, of course, you should let go of Donald Trump. But I think Bill and Hillary Clinton spoke to members of my generation. We always thought if we got somebody like the Clintons, especially Bill Clinton, calm, cool, assured, confident, was going to lead us in the right way. He was a decent man. He married not the most attractive woman in the world, but he married a woman that was his intellectual equal, even his intellectual superior. And if you're a baby boomer, you couldn't wait for a baby boomer president. I'm a baby boomer. I especially after 12 years of Republicans where they slashed everything, made Medicare more difficult, all those things. And they're still trying to get rid of Medicare, health savings plans or some nonsense. I was ready for a change. And Bill Clinton talked about being some po kid from Arkansas, made good, blah, blah, blah. Man called Hope. Actually, he only lived in Hope until his 7th birthday. He went to Little Rock Central High School, where he had his own car and golfed regularly. I think he was on the golf team. And certainly he was in the band. He played saxophone. So Bill Clinton's circumstances weren't as dire. And he was heavily influenced by his wife, who was a child of the upper middle class, who had no time for American working people. So as a working person like me and you, whether you own your own business or not, somebody who's not afraid to get their hands dirty sometimes, and I haven't, and I never was. Somebody like that, we looked to Bill Clinton and we hoped. We hoped our economic lives would be better. And he betrayed us. If you look at income inequality since Bill Clinton was in office, or union membership since Bill Clinton was in office, the numbers are disgraceful. Now, my friends who keep asking, why do you hate Bill and Hillary Clinton? It's because she put me in a basket of deplorables. I guess because I went to church, and again because I worked, and was some cases suspicious of this harsh older woman, not very much older than me, by the way, but she had a harsh look to her. And apparently I should have pushed, and I was really suspicious of her background. Maybe that makes me that must make me some kind of something, doesn't it? Doesn't it mean I'm racist or feminine? What am I? Somebody who doesn't like rich women? I don't know. Somebody put a name on it. You know, I must have some sort of identity. Last week I discovered that in the United States today, we have 46. Did you hear that? 46 individual identities that we can claim, and the government will threaten us with ruin if we don't respect all 46 of these identities. And we can never laugh at how ridiculous they are. I mean, Bruce Jenner, I don't care what he does. He's still 6'3", 6'4", broad shoulders, deep chest, and he looks like a dude. That's it. End of story. He can tell me he's a woman all day long. And I'll hold up a mirror to him and say, right, sure, anything you say. Dave Chappelle's in big trouble with liberals for being funny, and by God, liberals don't find anything that's very funny. No. We must transform society into our own image because we are just so wonderful. We are just so supercilious. Get off of our backs, will you? Just stay off of our backs. And yeah, Joe Biden's going to be a one-term president. In fact, I look for him to resign and let Kamala Harris run against Trump. By that time, Donald Trump may have screwed things, or not Donald Trump, but Joe Biden may have screwed things up so bad that Kamala won't be able to do it. If the presidential election were held today between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, who would you vote for? Because I tell you, I think Biden would lose in a landslide. And I'm not talking like Trump is the greatest guy in the world. I don't. He's definitely not. Again, some of my friends are having trouble with the Alec Baldwin thing. Here's the deal with Alec Baldwin. You have a bunch of liberal elitists out making a movie somewhere, and they don't know a damn thing about guns. They had a very young woman as their armorer. In other words, this very young woman was in charge of the weapons used on the set to make sure they were safe. Baldwin, knowing less about guns than the young armorer, pointed an actual gun at a director and some of the other professional people on the set. Rule number one, as everybody in Iowa knows who owns a gun, you never point a gun at another person unless you're going to shoot him. You think it's not loaded? How many people just in our state have been killed by young people who thought the gun was empty? Baldwin is in his 60s, and he's a tremendous know-it-all. That's what makes this so delicious. Donald Trump has never killed anybody. Donald Trump never shot anybody. I think he made mention of it before, but he never did. He never shot anybody. But Alec Baldwin killed a person and wounded a couple of others because he's a blockhead and doesn't know anything about guns, but he's got to play a tough guy in the movies because that's the way he sees himself. Is there any doubt? I mean, even when he's on shows like Bill Maher or any of those shows, he comes out snarling, I'm a tough guy, I'm going to beat you up or something. That seems to be his attitude. Get right down to it, he doesn't know anything that traditional males know, like how to handle a gun. And rule number one, that's the first thing I taught my son when I bought him a shotgun so he could go pheasant hunting with us. There's two places where the barrel should be pointed, almost always at the ground. The only time you raise the barrel of your gun is to shoot a pheasant and then count to 2 to make sure there's nobody within the line of fire. Pheasants are fast, but they're not that fast. And never assume, ever, that a gun isn't loaded. Only a smarmy, supercilious, know-nothing guy like Alec Baldwin would do something like that. And that's the truth, Ruth. So, because Baldwin and others, and even some of my friends, are still barking about Donald Trump and all the money that we paid to provide security for he and his family, if you really want something bad to happen to Trump, make Alec Baldwin his bodyguard. There's an idea for you. I want you people out there to start advocating for that right now, to make Alec Baldwin and his brothers, who are all supposed to be tough guys, Alec Baldwin and his brothers be in charge of security for Donald Trump. Come on. You know I'm right.
Florida and many other states to make it almost impossible for Democrats to come back. But I would say the second map that it has been proposed by the Nonpartisan Legislative Services Agency, it looks like a fair map to me. I mean, I do think it's a map that gives Republicans advantages because they've been doing well lately, but it's not, it's certainly, if Republicans had a free hand to gerrymander, they could make it an even more beneficial map for them.
And I didn't mean to imply that a map meant the Republicans are trying to gain traction that they don't deserve. Mm-hmm. Even without the map, and I think you may have alluded to that, the Republicans seem to be doing very well in our state.
What the trends that are happening in Iowa are similar to what we've seen in other states, where in a lot of communities, working class communities in particular, that for many years were Democratic strongholds, and Fort Dodge is a great example of that, along with Ottumwa, Keokuk, and some other towns in Iowa, places where the Democrats historically have done very well, but the Republicans have gained a lot of ground. And conversely, the Democrats have been doing better and better in suburbs. I live in a suburban area that used to be absolutely rock solid Republican. I now have Democrats representing me in the Iowa House and Senate. But in Iowa, there are so many more people living in the working class communities compared to the suburbs that the trends, I mean, it's different in some states like Minnesota or Georgia, or Virginia is another great example, where those overall trends favor the Democrats statewide, but in Iowa, that the same trends that we're seeing across the country favor the Republicans. So Democrats need to find a way to get back to winning in some of these smaller towns or smaller cities, places, again, like Fort Dodge, Council Bluffs would be another one, Mason City, Muscatine. So those are the areas where Democrats really have a lot of work to do in Iowa.
They really do, and you're right. When I was a young man, there were 3 counties in Iowa you could depend on as solidly Democratic, and that was Dubuque, mm-hmm. Webster, and Carroll. Now, those were all working class areas, and they were all heavily Catholic areas, and I'm talking 40 years ago. It's not like I'm talking yesterday. But you really couldn't get into the courthouse at all. You couldn't get an elected position in the Webster County Courthouse in 1980 if you were a Republican. You just couldn't do it.
And there were other counties, small counties, where Democrats did very well. I mean, Emmett County, Audubon County, Fayette County. I mean, there used to be quite a lot of rural Democrats in the legislature. Actually, when I became active as a volunteer in politics for the first time in the 1980s, there were a lot of conservative Democrats representing rural areas or small towns. And there were also pro-choice moderate Republicans representing suburbs like mine. So things have really changed a lot. But what we don't have anymore are the smaller counties that vote Democratic. I mean, people like Leonard Boswell, Patty Judge, they came from smaller rural counties.
Oh, yes.
They built very strong political careers for decades.
Do you think it's because the Democratic Party has changed? They are no longer grounded in the working class, or no longer grounded in the Catholic faith or even the Christian faith. They have become more like, they represent more the national platform of the Democratic Party. Now, California is a different place. Let me finish. California is a much different place than Iowa. Texas is a much different place than California or New York. New York's a different place than Florida, on and on and on. But do you think then that the Democrats are failing because they don't have good candidates, or for any number of reasons? What is your take on that?
Well, I mean, I reject the premise that Democrats that have, less represent communities of faith. I mean, Joe Biden is a very strong practicing Catholic, and many Democrats active in Iowa politics are very deeply rooted in faith. So I don't think that that's the reason. I know that that's the Republican Party. That's a narrative that Republicans like to push about Democrats. And I don't agree that Democrats have forgotten about working class issues. I think that the Democratic Party platform is still much better for working class people. I think there are a lot of things going on. I think, frankly, the conservative dominance of talk radio, the fact that you could hardly find a talk radio host anywhere in the state of Iowa who's not conservative, that certainly contributes, because we know that in a lot of smaller communities that people do listen to the radio, and they're getting that message from people like you 365 days a year that, that Republicans have it right and Democrats have it wrong, basically.
Well, yes, that's the message I put out there. You know why liberal talk radio fails, of course, because
the corporate advertisers
that's right.
like the conservative messages.
That's exactly right. Liberals don't own businesses for the most part. Of course they do. That's. I didn't mean to make that too broad a statement, but most businesses don't want to hear about how flawed capitalism is. I give them that message every now and then, but of course, no, I don't think they're listening to me. But that is the real reason why conservative talk radio is so successful. Because
the fact that the Reagan administration got rid of the fairness doctrine, there used to be an equal time provision that hasn't been in effect for decades. So that is, I think that contributes. But I mean, there are probably a lot of reasons for the voting trends. And again, this is not something that's just occurring in Iowa. If you've seen in all across the country, but especially in the upper Midwest, these kind of communities that are similar to Fort Dodge in other states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Wisconsin, those communities have also trended toward the Republicans as other areas like suburbs have trended toward the Democrats. So the difference is, again, like the way the population is distributed in Iowa compared to a place like Minnesota where more than half of the state lives in the Twin Cities metro. So that's why Democrats are still able to control the state, even though they're losing ground in places like Duluth, for instance.
Well, that's true. The last I checked, I think 50 to 60% of the population lived in the Minneapolis area. And they really do consider themselves kind of a hip liberal state for some reason. Any state that calls themselves the Gophers, I got to wonder about. Laura Bellin is our guest, and she is the author of Bleeding Heartland blog. I recommend it to you. You can go to bleedingheartland.com and find the article that Laura and I are discussing here today. And Laura, again, makes reference to the Supreme Court. Now, I read this carefully. You seem to be saying to Democrats, which are the majority, I assume, of your readers, you seem to be saying... I have
a lot of Republican readers, but probably it's true that the majority are Democrats.
Hey, I'm a regular reader, and I'm not a Democrat anymore, believe me. And I confess to conservatism. But I read it. I read your column in bleedingheartland.com fairly regularly. You seem to be saying that maybe the Supreme Court won't sign off on this year's redistricting. Was that the message you were trying to say?
Well, I think if the legislature passes one of the nonpartisan plans, I think they will sign off. I think what the Supreme Court may not allow is the Republicans changing one of the nonpartisan plans to a gerrymandered map that would suit them. The Iowa Supreme Court this year has an unusual role because the census numbers were so delayed. So because the legislature didn't finish redistricting before September 15th, the Iowa Supreme Court now has to approve whatever map the legislature votes for. I mean, the Supreme Court has in effect given the legislature permission to go through this redistricting process because frankly, after September 15th, the legislature doesn't really have any constitutional role in drawing the legislative districts. But the Supreme Court took the position that it wasn't the Iowa lawmakers' fault that the census numbers were delayed, and so they were going to let the legislature go through, roughly speaking, the normal process of redistricting. But if Republicans mess around with a nonpartisan map, that's what I think the Supreme Court may not let them do.
Why was the census count delayed again?
Well, there were a lot of problems with the census last year, but primarily it was because of the pandemic. But there were also lawsuits because of questions the Trump administration wanted to include that were not deemed to later be not legal. But a lot of it was just related to the difficulty of conducting a census and getting accurate numbers during a pandemic.
Well, you made note of the fact that we have an entirely different Supreme Court now. I mean, it has been appointed mainly by conservatives. I mean, Brett Apple, as you point out in your piece, was appointed by Tom Vilsack. But again, we have a decidedly different court, and it leans conservatively. Would you agree or not?
I think generally on many issues it does, although I was just reading today, there's an article in the Des Moines Register about a couple of Supreme Court rulings that came out last Friday, which I hadn't noticed, that follow a trend of 4-3 decisions where 3 of the justices appointed by Governor Reynolds and Brent Apple have handed down some decisions that are very favorable to criminal defendants and not the desired outcome for either the police or, in this case, the Polk County prosecutors, Polk County attorney.
Are you
so
talking
I think that's
about?
very interesting.
Are you talking about? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but are you talking about the prosecution of people involved in disturbances over the George Floyd murder?
No, I'm talking about there were Iowa Supreme Court rulings that were related to, these were criminal cases that didn't get a lot of publicity, but this was rulings that were just handed down that said basically prosecutors can up the charges very shortly before trial. But there were also a couple of rulings last year related to searches where police had used evidence that they took out of people's garbage, and the Iowa Supreme Court ruled 4-3 that basically you have a privacy right, that the police just can't go in without a warrant and search your garbage that's outside your home. So these are conservative justices that came down with rulings that I would consider unexpected for a conservative court. So, I mean, I do think generally we saw in the election litigation last year that reached the Iowa Supreme Court related to absentee ballots, the majority did come down on the side of the Republican Party. But I don't think this is a Supreme Court that would rubber stamp just whatever the Republicans want, especially not in a redistricting case where they have a very strong precedent in this 1972 decision, which I discuss in the post that you shared, that was a unanimous decision. So I think we don't know. There's always a lot of uncertainty when you go to court. But that's why if I were the Republican legislators right now, I would just pass the map they have in front of them instead of trying to mess around with a gerrymander that may or may not get past the Iowa Supreme Court.
You point out that Matthew McDermott, a new Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, fairly new, has done, as you quote, and I'm quoting from your article, extensive legal work for the Republican Party of Iowa and represented Iowa House Republicans in an election contest. He's now in the Supreme Court. Could he sway the court?
Well, he's 1 out of 7, right?
Right,
I mean,
right.
I would argue that if a redistricting case gets to the court, that he should really recuse himself. I mean, we've had justices. There was a justice who retired a few years ago, Bruce Zager, but he used to recuse himself from every case that involved anyone working at the same law firm where his daughter worked, even if it was a case that his daughter wasn't working on and had clients his daughter had nothing to do with. So we're talking now about a redistricting lawsuit that potentially would involve the Iowa House and Senate Republicans, and Matthew McDermott literally represented the Iowa House Republicans in an election contest less than 3 years ago. And before that, he was the general counsel for the Republican Party of Iowa for a number of years. He also represented Senator Joni Ernst in her divorce. So, I mean, he's got such deep Republican ties. I would say that really he should recuse himself. But if he didn't recuse himself, he's 1 out of 7. Then you'd have to get 3 more justices to go along with a Republican gerrymander, and I'm just not sure that they want to go there. I think they would really carefully look at the map and look at the law and look at the precedent. I definitely don't think it's a sure thing that they would go along with what Republicans want just because 6 of the 7 were appointed by Republicans.
Was Justice McDermott, is his daughter an attorney as well?
I have no idea. I'm just saying that we've had justices. Justice Mansfield is another example where for the first 3 or 4 years that he was on the Supreme Court, he used to recuse himself from any cases involving the law firm where he formerly worked. And even if it was a client or a partner that he never worked with. So what I'm saying is, I mean, judges make their own decisions on when they think their impartiality could be questioned. But I think a reasonable person could say that Justice McDermott, since he literally was representing Iowa House Republicans, you could question whether he has the ability to be impartial in deciding a case that would pit Iowa House Republicans versus probably the Iowa Democratic Party. I mean, certainly if Republicans passed a gerrymandered map, it's guaranteed that there would be lawsuits, at least one lawsuit, but maybe multiple lawsuits. In this 1972 case, there were 3 lawsuits challenging the 1971 map that the Iowa Supreme Court consolidated and ruled on all at the same time.
Laura Bellin, I could certainly talk to you a lot longer. I'll have to have you on the air more frequently. Laura Bellin is with bleedingheartland.com. I recommend it to you. Thank you, Laura.
Oh, thanks for having me.
You bet. This is AM 1400, KVFD, the voice for none.
Fever is the leading symptom of COVID and the flu, and the only way to reliably detect it is with an accurate thermometer. Be vigilant and be accurate with the Exergen Temporal Scanner, whose accuracy has been proven in more than 100 clinical studies. Don't rely on
job.
Michael Devine at AM 1400 KVFD.
That's where you are right now at AM 1400 KVFD, the voice for Dodge. We're broadcasting live from the Blue Ribbon Pelham Waters studio. Blue Ribbon Pelham Waters is at 612 South 32nd Street here in Fort Dodge. You may contact Blue Ribbon Pelham Waters by calling 576-6481 or online at www.ftwater.com. Joining us today, as usual at this time, is City Manager David Furyk. Welcome, David.
Hi, Mike.
Well, I'm sorry that you're having a little problem with a cough there.
Yeah, I am. Sorry.
Maybe it's just that, every year, I don't know if you have allergies, but I certainly do. And when the farmers are, you can't even see it, but they got a lot of dust in the air right now. A lot of it was knocked down due to the rain, that sort of thing. But when they're out in the field and they're really going strong, I suffer terribly. I used to get steroid shots.
Oh, wow.
Every fall.
Yeah, I really don't think I have allergies. I just got some sort of head cold.
Oh, no.
Hanging around.
No, I wasn't suggesting.
My family does. They suffer from the allergies too.
The point I was trying to make is really when these sorts of things are going on in the atmosphere, everybody kind of suffers a little bit. Suffers probably a too strong a word, but it bothers everybody a little bit.
Yeah.
David Furyk is city manager. You have a question or comment for the city manager. It's 515-955-1400. By the way, if I sound far away from the mic, it's because I'm far away from the mic. But if you would like to see as well as hear what happens in the studio, please go to my Facebook page, which is Michael Devine, the radio station Facebook page, which is at AM 1400 KVFD, or yourfortdodge.com, and you will see audio and video of what happens here. We had a city council meeting last night. Did you cuff around the council people and straighten them out? Or?
No, it was actually a pretty uneventful council meeting. I think we were only about 10 minutes on business items, and we had a workshop in advance where we talked about our judicial diversion program that's been going on a couple of years. And
I read about that in the Messenger. I rarely give the Messenger credit, but at least they had that on the front page. And not that they had that much of an explanation. It's typing rather than writing. But
so 2 years
had to get that in there. Sorry.
2 years ago, we initiated this program. It's a partnership with the juvenile court system, City of Fort Dodge Community Schools, and APHIS. And APHIS is primarily not primarily, they are the service provider. They provide the counseling and consulting services. And the idea behind it is when you got a juvenile that has done something either that could lead to a criminal charge, but as a lesser charge in their first offense, or maybe their behavior isn't quite criminal yet, but it's to the point where people are noticing that there's a pattern. APHIS can come in and do diversion type of stuff. And a lot of that is counseling, some called True Thought counseling, where they work with the students about what they did and why they did it, and try to get to the bottom of that. They do some community service, and they do there's a whole bunch of other things, but the idea is to have some close interaction, regular interaction with the youth, to basically keep them out of the judicial system, because the longer you can keep a youth out of the judicial system, the more likely they're not ever going to engage with the judicial system.
Good for them.
It's kind of the statistics that are out there. So we've been at it now 2 years. The first year was kind of a half year once we got started, but the last couple of years we've been, serving. I think it's been 30 plus kids per year. I think it's been a success. It's a great program for us. When I say us, meaning the Fort Dodge Police Department be part of, because and I see this almost seems kind of selfish, but when you involve APHIS and you can do that sort of counseling, that frees up the police officer to not have to try to do that. And we do have 2 school resource officers, one in the high school and one in the middle school, that would normally get engaged in this, but this is a way to have help, and so they can be doing other things or get assistance from counselors as well when they're interacting with kids. So it's one of those partnerships that Fort Dodge is great about, creating partnerships, and I think it's for the good of the overall community. I'm really excited.
Oh,
really
I
happy
do
with
too.
it.
I hope everybody in the community can get behind this. And, I've talked for years, and this is the narrative, and it went on quite a bit 10 years ago, that we would have some middle-aged white woman embezzle money from her employer, whether it be a private business or county or state or city, $300,000 and more in some cases. She'd cry all over the courtroom, and the judge would sentence her to probation, sometimes very short probation, and or parole, either one. But if you caught some black kid down on Central Avenue with 3 rocks in his pocket, he's going to prison, which I thought was terribly unjust. Terribly unjust. There were cases around that time like that. So if we can get, and I believe in Charles Clayton and his APHIS program. I think Charles and I have had a little bit of a falling out over critical race theory, but that's neither here nor there. But no, I'm very, very glad to see this sort of thing happening. It's better for the young person who a lot of times has been raised in poverty and doesn't have any hope, gets angry, does something foolish or crazy. I'm not making excuses for crime. I would never do that. But we should, if a child, no matter who they are, is struggling, we should do what we can. We should try to do everything we can. So I'm glad that's happening in our little town.
No, I think it's great. And, I'm trying to learn, Charles has helped educate me and some others on learn about, the bias that is in the judicial system and how you do end up with disproportionate minority contacts. And
I just described bias in the judicial.
You're describing it in that example, but you're trying to, and it's an interesting, maybe our term interesting isn't correct, but it's a complex social issue that, people are writing about and discussing, and it's got my interest in it, even though I'm not necessarily in the judicial system, but I'm in government, so something to pay attention to.
I'm going to talk like an old Catholic here just for a minute. The great sin is poverty. Nothing good comes from poverty.
Nothing good.
And Fort Dodge has been a poor town since the packing plants closed, and that's we have to recognize that. And I hope most people embrace the fact that poverty is a sin, and we need to look into the conditions. And sometimes it's racial prejudice. There's no doubt. We need to look into the conditions that have created the poverty in the first place. And, you and I, Denny Plouts, the mayor, we've all talked about training. I've talked about free community college, for example. And, of course, when they wanted to tighten up Biden's budget, the first thing that went out was free community college, which was stupid. But that's the world we live in. But no, if you don't have any hope and you're 17 years old, you don't have a skill, you don't have any of those things, that's a rough place to be. That's a very rough place. Whether you're black or white or whatever, that's a tough way to go. I mean, some kids are just going to be criminals out of that.
Yeah, and it's hard for a person in my position to sort of appreciate that. Something I got to work on, because I didn't grow up that way.
I know.
I grew up with, parents. I grew up middle class, parents at home. Mom stayed at home, dad worked. Together until my dad passed. And the question wasn't, are you going to graduate high school? It was, where are you going to go to college? It was, so that wasn't even something to wonder about.
Right.
So that was just the mentality. That was the culture in the household. It's like, okay, you're going to college and you're going to have to figure out what you want to do for a career. I mean, it was just how it is.
And your dad did what? He did.
My dad was actually the associate director of admissions and records for the University of Illinois. So he held a PhD.
Yeah.
He didn't go by doctor, but he held a PhD, through most of his career. But education was important. And so it's hard. It was hard. I haven't experienced it. So it's hard for me to fathom a household where it's not,
Yeah. Oh, there's those households out there.
There are plenty of them.
Yeah. And again, the ethnic background doesn't make any difference. There's a lot of white parents for some reason who are opposed to their kids going to probably just get a job, that sort of thing. And in the year 2021, that's absolutely crazy. However, having the mindset that your family had is a good thing. That's a good thing. That sort of training isn't for everybody.
Yeah.
And we have been talking for years. Again, I've been talking with you and others about the importance of training young people in the 21st century. And that's what we need to focus on. If we can do that, if we can hold up this education and training and say, here's some hope, that's huge. That's a big thing. That's
Yeah.
really a big thing.
Yeah, I mean there are lots of decent paying jobs available, in Fort Dodge and Iowa in general, and it may require some trade school stuff
Yes,
as
it
well.
does. Yeah.
And that's something that I know there's an effort to encourage kids that are thinking about something after high school to not necessarily think it only has to be 4-year university, to think
Yeah.
about trade schools and trades, because that's a heck of a way to jumpstart your career and
Mm-hmm.
start making decent living wage quickly.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And then if you find out that's something that you want to do more, then you can go back and get your 4-year degree
Yeah.
and do something else.
Yeah. Well,
But
again, if we can change that part of our culture, the hopeless part.
mhm.
And I don't think, I'm not going to be like some who point fingers and say, well, this person's lazy. They come from a lazy family, blah, blah. That's a bunch of baloney, I mean, sometimes that's the case, but in a very small percentage, I think. If you give somebody a way to make a decent living and make a decent
Mhm.
life, they'll take it.
Yeah.
Matt Bemrick, the Mayor Bemrick, told me years ago that if someone went to a trade school for electricians and then did some time as a journeyman, I don't know, it was a while, 3 to 5 years, I think,
Mhm.
as a journeyman, he would hire them at $60,000 a year with a full benefit package.
Mhm. Yeah.
Now that was a few years ago, so he's probably cranked it up to 70 by now. But you
Okay.
can make a decent living that
You
way.
can.
You can build some wealth.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to just worry about paying your bills day to day.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure.
So
That's a decent career.
I'm delighted to hear that the city's involved in this partnership along with the school district and APHIS. And,
Yeah.
I'm glad that Charles Clayton stayed in Fort Dodge and
Mhm.
put APHIS together. I know this is a labor of love for him.
Yeah. Yeah, I should give credit to Roger Porter. When he came in as chief, his primary focus was to develop these community partnerships
Yeah,
and work
yeah.
within the community. That's what his I think that's what his passion is as police chief, to develop the community police relationships. And this is an example of a success. And there's lots of things that we do in addition, or lots of things the police department does in addition to this, that is really helps create that bond between the community and the police department.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And Roger, all our police chiefs since I've lived in Fort Dodge, is a long time, have been decent people.
Mm-hmm.
Roger has really stuck out to me as somebody who can change with the times. And
Mhm.
the times, well, I never know what the culture is going to do day to day, really.
Yeah.
What's good, what's wrong, or whatever. But Roger seems to have he's very accepting of ideas, and
Yeah.
I'm sure he's trained his police force that way.
Yeah, and it's interesting. A couple examples of flexibility. As the millennials enter the police force, they want changes and they want different things like facial hair. So now we allow facial hair, which we didn't before, except a mustache. And used to be if you were a police officer, you had to cover any tattoos. Now we don't require tattoos to be covered.
Yep, that's right.
They can't be objectionable. I mean, you do have a few limits on your freedom of expression when you are a police officer. You can't have a
sure.
tattoo that may be objectionable to certain
Right.
people or race or things like that, and show it. That
But
has to be
people can
covered.
change,
Yeah.
Yeah, times have changed. I was a mouthy kid who drank too much 50 years ago, and I'll tell you, the police didn't have much time for dialogue. That was just cuffed and stuffed, and away we went.
Dialogue with a stick.
Here, get in the car. No, I ain't getting in that. Oh, I'm getting in the car. They didn't show me a lot of love, David. Yeah, gosh, yeah, those were the days. I just don't remember much about them. I just don't remember much about
That
them.
might be a good thing.
Yeah, that probably is. That probably is. City Manager David Ferrick is our guest. This is AM 1400 KVFD, the voice for Dodge. Again, if you have a question or comment for the City Manager, 515-955-1400. That's 955-1400. What else did we cover at the City Council
It's
meeting?
getting real, Mike. We bought $3 million worth of fiber yesterday.
Rock and roll. This is for our broadband,
Yeah.
because I can't wait to get rid of those guys who've been screwing us for so many years, gloriously screwing us. They've really had a good time. They didn't even kiss us. They just, hosed us.
The opinions of the announcer may not
The opinions of the announcers may not be
May not.
popular with David Ferrick, but they're the truth.
may not be the opinions of the city of Fort Dodge. Yeah. So yeah, it's getting real. We bought a building, now we're buying some fiber, and we're starting to piece it together. Still,
That's
it'll be
outstanding. That's the
it'll
best news
be-
I've heard in a while.
starting construction in 22, completing construction in 23. There may be some houses that get hooked up in 22 if they're close to because you build a ring. Basically, we're going to build a ring around this, or not
got a
not around
house-
the city,
I
within the
got a
city.
house on 4th Avenue.
You might
North.
be close.
Well, I need to be in the ring. I'll tell you that.
Mhm. And then probably should have almost everyone be able to hooked up by end of 23. Probably some in 24.
Okay. All right.
Mhm.
Don't make it too long. I'm getting old.
I know. We'll try to get you first, so you can continue to be our free commercial.
That's right. You have an advocate in me. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I grew up in the TV antenna era, and sometimes
Yeah.
during a strong winter storm, the TV antenna would be blown over on the roof.
It happened at our house. when
That
I
was a
kid.
tragedy.
It got blown over and went through the roof in our
Oh,
house.
no.
Yeah. Had to
Wow.
get a new antenna.
I didn't think you're in your 50s, right?
I'm 52. yeah.
52. I didn't think you would be part of the TV generation, TV
Antenna.
antenna generation.
Yeah, I think growing up in Champaign, Illinois, we were a little bit later with cable TV than some places. But no, we had an antenna probably I was like 10, 12 years old, something like that by the time we went to cable.
All right.
Yeah, probably around 12ish. Because then I became a Cubs fan because WGN had all the Cubs games on every day. Started, I think, at 12:05 or something like that.
Oh yeah, I
You
missed
got
those
all the
days.
Cub games.
I think I share that with you. That was one of the
Mhm.
reasons I became a Cub fan, is because they were the next door neighbor, or the neighbors across the street. One of the boys was a few years older, but
Yeah.
he had Cub games on the radio
Oh,
all the time,
yeah.
and
WGN.
that was just great. Anyway, don't we have some sort of housing incentives? Would you explain that real quick?
Okay, so yeah, and I won't go into too much detail. We're almost out of time, but yeah, we had to extend our existing housing incentives as part of when you do these urban renewal plans. There's a certain lifetime, and you have to approve to extend them. So like we have, so if you build rental housing, you can get basically it's like a 10-year tax abatement on a sliding scale, and then we have tax abatement for new single family housing, which is, I think, what is it amount? Is it 100% of the first 75,000 in value? I don't have it in front of me, but so yeah, we extended those incentives because we think we can still do more here. We like to incent people to continue to do both rental housing and new single family homes. So yeah, that was on the agenda.
Any way I can get in on this?
I think you did with the unit
I think
you're
I
in.
did. Yeah, I
Yeah.
got 5 years.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm next year's my first year.
Oh yeah, you start paying taxes.
Got to start paying taxes, yeah, which I already think they're too much. I haven't paid a dime yet, but I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, David Fergie, this has been very informative, and I thank you. I thank you for your persistence in defense of the internet customers of Fort Dodge, and I look forward to talking with you next week.
Okay, sounds
All right.
great.
This is AM 1400 KVFT.
Michael Devine at AM 1400 KVFD, banging Monday through Friday from 2 to 5.
It's 4:30. Jim Kirsten, right after the news.
Did you know that United Healthcare helps connect you to doctors and therapists with 24/7 access to virtual care?